thank you all for remaining in the room. It's good we have a nice even mix of people at both panels. I'm sure all of your burning questions now that you had from the previous session can be posed to our panel, and you can interrogate them and give them the Spanish Inquisition. So with no further ado, Imogen Wall will be chairing the panel. She's an independent consultant with a huge number of years of experience, one of the founding members of sort of the communication as aid movement. We have Paul CONNEALLY from the ITU, Head of Communications, Ed Happ, which is the CIO of IFRC, Sebastian ANCAVIL is a GIS officer at IOM, and Patrick you know already. So without any further ado, over to Imogen.
Not sure how I feel about huge numbers of years of experience.
Sorry, Imogen.
Thanks, John. Well, I'm going to ask my panel to introduce themselves as well. That was a spectacular number of acronyms in a sentence. What are we here to talk about? We're here to talk about the cool stuff and turn some stuff upside down. We all know the statistics. We heard from Patrick, 90% of the world having phones, millions of people coming online the whole time, more people in low and middle income countries having access to technology, communications technology specifically, than they do to toilets, to basic sanitation. Smartphone ownership now going up massively across the world. This is demand driven, all of this. No one's pushing it on people. But what does it mean? As I think was mentioned a little bit before, and certainly in Leonard's session, we talk a lot about tech and innovation in our world. We tend to start with us and then to talk about them. So what we're going to try and do in this panel is flip that. We're going to talk about how effective people use technology and how and what this is changing. What it means for the humanitarian responses of the future, by which I mean all humanitarian responses and not just the ones where we show up. We've got a really amazing panel here. I'm going to get them to introduce themselves in a minute. We're going to talk about what's coming down the pipe. We're going to talk about what they're excited about. We're going to talk about what that means for response. And we're going to do that for about 20, 25 minutes. And then it's over to you. We want to keep this, there's no presentations. We want to keep this conversational. My challenge to you is the one that is in front of the World Humanitarian Summit, because this panel came about partly because I'm writing a paper for CDAC Network on the future communications for the World Humanitarian Summit. Let's question our assumptions and think beyond our conventional parameters, both of our own work and of the organizations in which we operate. So I'm going to go through each of my panel, get them to introduce themselves, and ask them, put your cards on the table. Tell me what you personally are most excited about. What's really transformational that you're seeing happening in the field in the way that affected communities use technology? What technologies are coming down the pipe, and how do you see people picking those tools up and using them? And I'm going to start with Mr. CONNEALLY at the end here.
Thank you very much.
To press the button.
Thank you very much, and good afternoon, everybody. So quick introduction. My name is Paul CONNEALLY. I work with the ITU, which is the International Telecommunications Union. That is the specialized agency of the United Nations for Information and Communication Technologies. So like all UN agencies, we have member states as our members, but unlike other UN agencies, we also have private sector members. We have more than 700 from the telecommunications world. So anybody you care to mention, including now, these days, Google and Facebook and Apple, are all members of ITU. There's three main areas of ITU that we're working in. That's the whole area of spectrum allocation. Standardization, which is a really crucial issue. It's about interoperability. It's the only way we can scale up. And the third one, which I think is very much close to the hearts of everybody here, which is linking or addressing digital divide issues. What most excites me about what's happening the most? Well, I have brought a slide with me, not to show off my wonderful PowerPoint presentations and how I can scale photographs very badly onto a slide share, but I wonder, could anybody tell me what these little red dots might represent? Wild guess. There'd be a free glass of champagne for any volunteers.
Okay, well, in that case, I'll make a guess if nobody else will.
Okay, well, what this represents for me is something very, very exciting, and I think it goes to the heart of communicating with communities. This is a map of all the countries in Africa which currently have technology hubs. So my question would be, what humanitarian organizations, development organizations, all of whom will be working in these types of contexts, have actually gone to the local technology hubs to work with them, to collaborate with them, to see what they're doing, and to partner with them. I think this is a very important step that we need to make. These are not single technology hubs, by the way. These are countries with technology hubs. Some of them have many, such as Kenya. In fact, in Kenya, there's more than 150 successful technology companies who source their origins to one particular technology hub called iHub. So there's thousands of technology companies coming out of Africa, and it's the same in other regions for sure. And I think this is something really, really exciting, that innovation is happening at the grassroots level, and the best solutions, as we all know, will come from the grassroots level and not be imported from Geneva or New York or Silicon Valley or wherever. So I think that, to me, is a really fantastic indicator, this grassroots economic development and innovation, which will be a future partnership model, I believe, for humanitarian organizations.
Brilliant. Thank you. Mr. Happ.
Thank you, Imogen. Thank you, Paul. So probably the one part of my background that may interest you all is, aside from the work at the Red Cross Red Crescent, which I'm very proud of, is having co-founded NetHope, which is the organization of all the technology leaders in 43 of the largest international organizations at the intersection of technology and humanitarian work. And you know, one of the things I think we found in NetHope that probably applies to the question is that there's huge opportunity in collaborating, but collaborating is very hard to do when you have all the resources you need at hand. Collaboration is probably most often born out of scarcity. What excites me the most is actually at the end of this month, I'm going to, for the 8th time, be a judge at the Microsoft Imagine Cup competition. And this is the world's best, brightest students from 200 countries, 350,000 applications. And they can narrow it down to 3,000 in-country competition, and 100 of the best come to, in this case, this year, Seattle, to compete with technology solutions, all of which have to have a side of how they will address what was the MDGs and will now be the new ones. And the thing about students that excites me is they mash up technologies in ways that we haven't thought of. So I go with the expectation of having my eyes poked, if you will, by what creative things that they've done. I'll just give you one quick story that I think illustrates this. The team from Jordan a few years ago were working with a young paraplegic woman who had lost the use of her arms and legs in an automobile accident. And they first interviewed her on video, and she was, as you might imagine, very depressed and talked about her life being over. And so these group of students said, well, you know, maybe we can help out. And so they took a remote control apart. And from there, they took the diode out of the front of the remote control, and they mounted it on a baseball cap. And then they took a Wii box, and they duct taped the Wii box to a computer monitor. And they wrote a little piece of software that when she moved her head, the mouse moved on the screen. And when she paused, it clicked. And from there, she created her own Facebook page. She created her own contact list. She made contact with her family and friends. And except for maybe that little piece of software that managed the mouse, none of the other pieces were new. And I love the fact that it had duct tape, you know, on it. And so I think one of the most exciting things about technology is the discovery of those duct tape moments, if you will. That I now expect from the students. And so I hope to come back after the end of this month with more stories like that one.
Thanks, Ed. Okay, well, I'm chairing, but I'm still going to have a go. My name is Imogen. I'm a communications consultant. I'm freelance. I'm currently doing some work for the CDAC network. I'm really glad you said that, actually, because the thing that has blown my mind most recently is actually, this is a story I've stolen from a colleague called Anahi, who works at Internews. And this is from Central African Republic, for the people who were talking earlier about the importance of Central African Republic. And she was describing how in downtown Bangui, you could get a custom-made phone built for you. That old phones, when they break, I mean, no one throws anything away, right? There are people there who will take a phone apart and build a different phone using composite parts of a phone and build it so it does. So if you want one that just uses Facebook, or you want one that's got a Bluetooth capacity, you can have that built in. Bespoke phones. That's downtown Bangui. That blows my mind, because we still think about the phone industry, the tech industry, as a product, as this, and once it's this, we can't do anything with it. And the guys in downtown Bangui in that market, they got totally different ideas about what this is, and that blows me away.
As a GIS officer for the International Organization for Migration, the technology it's the main tool for the mapping. We need to put the map from paper to database. So technology, we need to have this technology from the local to server to the online platform. Also, as a humanitarian UAV user, we use a lot of this new technology, the small plane, to take a picture of the country we main use in Haiti. So what was exciting, to answer the question, is to have this Haitian community to work with them to get this new data, this new high-resolution image, to collect a photo of the camps or after a disaster. We collaborate a lot with OpenStreetMap, the community of OpenStreetMap, and we train them, and now it's like a domino. They train, and then they're volunteer, we train them, and then it's the data sharing that we do all together in Haiti, and I hope this example can be used in other missions in other countries. Thanks.
Thank you, Sebastian.
Great, thank you. I mean, in terms of what is exciting on technology, I think, to me, the most exciting thing I'm seeing right now is what I refer to as a digital transformation that we're seeing within the whole humanitarian sector. And when I say digital transformation, I'm actually even questioning that, because the language is evolving so very, very quickly that every time I'm speaking, I've got to double check whether this is the current language or not, and that applies to everything within that digital transformation. But what it actually boils down to is about the transition from the analog models into the digital domain, and that includes digital aid and accountability and various other technology-dependent response mechanisms, which again switches from like the analog 8-track into the digital CD. This creates these wonderful opportunities in the sense that it's no longer about the technology. The technology is becoming commodified. It lets us focus on the clear issues and removes the, a lot of the, we can't do this because we don't have that. Those days are over, and that's due to a variety of facts, including, the ubiquitous penetration of both the internet, communications, radio is still incredibly relevant, and then we add additional transformative layers such as the Internet of Things, this massive tsunami explosion of data. Just one fact, which I'm still trying to wrap my mind around, is that 90% of all data ever created by humankind has been created in the last 2 years. And this is before we're seeing this third wave of the internet with literally billions upon billions of discrete devices that are going to be out there, the access to the communications, increased broadband. What this creates is this beautiful opportunity where we all know that comms is aid and everyone has a need to communicate. Sometimes it can be perceived as nice to have. With digital aid, it's a need to have and a precursor for all of this to function. So the opportunities that are created through this de-emphasis on technology and assuming that it will all start coming together is such an amazing opportunity for us.
Super, thank you. There was a lot in that. I want to start by picking up on something that you said, Paul, about innovation being completely locally driven. Ed, I know you've got quite a strong background with the private sector, and Patrick, you as well. Is that true?
It's a good provoking question, right? No, it's not true. So, I mean, there's, as in most things, I think it was M. Scott Peck who said that, most truths end up being paradoxes. There's a paradox in that you've got global corporations who have created the platforms on which local innovations are being developed. So both have a role, both have innovated, and both have invested time and energy in doing those. So to say that all of the interesting innovations or most true innovations are going to happen locally is to miss half the point. And the point being that the innovations that are happening locally are tremendously important and interesting, but if you didn't have the global companies providing the platforms and the tools for building these, I don't think you'd see them.
I mean, I don't believe say that the best innovation happens locally, but I said there is to recognize that there is extraordinary innovation happening locally, and not to mix up invention and innovation. So what I'm talking about are communities which are, they're really disrupting existing technologies for a start, they're collaborating in new ways, and the whole area of convergence is something really, really interesting for me. So for instance, the way that sectors like telecoms, mobile telecoms, energy, and banking are coming together in prepaid electricity in places like Mali, right? Now that won't happen in Geneva, Ed, because that's not possible for us to do that here. It's not the market is completely different. But where you have off-grid communities who really need to find innovative solutions to give themselves very basic things like energy in an affordable way, then these innovations happen. And that's coming out of the support of local technology hubs in places like Mali and in East Africa. So that's the sort of innovation I'm talking about. Although I do think we will see, with the incredible pickup of broadband in places like Africa. I mean, in 2014 alone, it was a 40% increase in broadband penetration in Africa. And it's the most dynamic technology ever. It's the fastest growing technology in history, mobile broadband. So you will see a continent which is already extraordinarily innovative in how it adapts and disrupts existing technologies and finds probably the best solutions for the local challenges that they have, that they will indeed be entering very much in the invention phase of innovation as well in the not too distant future. So you could see the next Google coming out of somewhere like Africa.
Do you know, that's really interesting, because that reminds me of a conversation I was having with the GSMA the other day, actually looking at mobile money, and the point they made very strongly to me was that we think mobile money is places where it's actually a thing. It's like M-Pesa. But actually, mobile credit as currency is already effectively creating mobile money markets in all sorts of countries where there aren't formal financial mobile systems. So again, that's a challenge to our thinking that, we look for mobile money where there's, a mobile money app or a program or a project, but actually mobile money is happening everywhere because it's happening with credit. I mean, it sounds like from what you're saying, that there's and maybe a little bit about what Patrick was saying, that we're looking at really divergent environments, core platforms and technologies coming from the West, but then being recreated in multiple different ways to the point where it's going to be really difficult to generalize. Is that, either of you, is that fair?
Yeah, I mean, I'll take it first. I think that's fair. And I mean, on the mobile money one, it's also a good example of convergence. It's a good example of a technology that's really taking off in contexts where it's perceived as a real need. I think you have something like 2.5 billion adults who don't have a bank account. And as Bill Gates said, you don't need bank accounts, but you do need banking. So the mobile, which is, as we heard from GSMA, is almost in everybody's hand now, is a really, really good platform for developing that and for driving economic empowerment, for creating much more inclusion in the future digital economy and knowledge economy. And I think that's really, that's at the basis of a lot of the issues which will drive development in the future.
I want to just touch on one point in terms of this whole localization. And I mean, I think one of my latest, I was going to say rants and raves or soapboxes, but I don't necessarily know it's that far. But I keep hearing repetitively from people that, you know, there is no local communications, there is no data, there is no humanitarian data, excuse me. And I think, you know, what we need to really make extra concerted efforts on is that the fact is that communications has always existed within communities. You know, data, information, exchange, analysis, dissemination has always been there. The fact is that we need to identify ways of being able to plug into it a little bit more effectively and localize our response, you know, at that community level. But I think one of the issues that we always have is that we tend to bring in our technology processes and then start just, again, devaluing what was existing there already. And in some cases, it's a high-end solution in terms of leveraging the internet and the social. Another aspect, when I'm thinking about West Africa, for instance, where there was so much more trust in radio and other local, you know, mechanisms, that we cannot discount these and just say, okay, well, this is the new tech, this is the digital transformation, forget about all that. We need to somehow adapt to that localization.
I can jump in. I would definitely agree with that, and I think, you know, I think the first thing in the toolkit of any humanitarian professional who's tasked with coming up with a strategy for communicating with disasters, I think, is to really look and understand that how people are using technology in the contexts of concern. So be it Nepal or Haiti or whatever. Haiti is often used as an example of, you know, where there was a real digital humanitarian action. And I don't believe, and there's many colleagues I see in the room who were there as well as myself at that time. We didn't go with a preset notion for that to happen, but when we were there, you could see very clearly that the mobile was an essential tool and was something that was there to be tapped into and leveraged, and working closely with the operational arms of the humanitarian organizations, it very quickly gained traction. But the whole key to the whole thing was how local people were using technologies and how organizations adapted to that local reality and not coming in from Miami or whatever with, you know, boatloads of mobile phones.
So both of you, it sounds to me, are talking about the need for an almost anthropological, ethnographic lens on this, understanding the social and cultural whys and hows people use technology, not just what the gadget is and where it came from, and how we tap into it.
Yeah, anthropological, or you could even say business. You know, I think Bill Gates or the CEO of Ooredoo or Vodafone would say it's not about the technology, it's about the people. And it really is about the users, and it'll always be about the users. And it's exactly the same with the clients and humanitarian response or humanitarian operations. It's the beneficiaries of those operations, the clients, the real owners of the humanitarian response, who are the key to understanding and designing the most effective response.
So just to pick up on that, and actually, no, Ed, this might be one for you. We're talking a lot about localization. We've also, you know, got what Patrick was saying about, and this is the fastest growing technology. We've talked a lot in the past about the digital divide. Is this going to disappear when there's 100% access and 100% network coverage? What is the next step, the future of the digital divide? Is it a yesterday's debate, or is it still something we have to think about?
Well, you know, I think if you had asked us 5 years ago, you know, would we have ended the digital divide in 5 years? Probably most of us would have said yes, and we would have been wrong. I think there's been tremendous progress. You know, that statistic I think that Patrick cited, going from, you know, 70% connected to 90% connected in the world is quite amazing. But that last 10%, that last 5%, that last 3% gets harder and harder to do. So I don't think we're we're there yet. It seems like it's in reach, but it may take a bit longer than we expect or even want to have everybody connected. And once everybody's connected, doesn't mean that everybody automatically knows how to use it. You know, in the same, you know, one of the questions I heard posed, which sort of gave me great pause, was there are many people, particularly in emerging countries, who say, "Why have the internet?" And for those of us in the North and the West, it's sort of like, you know, that's a what type of question. You know, the internet has become almost like air for us. You know, my children don't know a time when there was no internet available, but many people in the world don't know what's the value. So, and many of them will create their own value. I think Paul and others have already touched on this. That requires a mind shift on our part, because we have to expect that we're going to discover things from coming out of emerging countries that we would not have thought of or invented, I think, in the West. You know, one example I really love, and Imogen and I talked about this, was, you know, in India, there's a whole, in Bangladesh now as well, there's a whole culture around the missed call, a whole economy around the missed call. And the way a missed call works is that if you arrange with somebody in advance to say, meet me in front of the market when I send you a missed call, you call them and let it ring once or twice and hang up. That means it's free, all right? The person on the other side sees that it's your phone number, that it's you that called, and they then will go pick you up at the market. Now, what has just happened there is that there's been an information transaction that's occurred that's free, and that's particularly important in that context and in that environment. But now what's happened is now the organizations are saying, if you support this issue, send a missed call to this number. And so advocacy groups again in India wanted to know what the public's perspective was on some particular issue of fraud and corruption, and said, if you believe X about this, send a missed call to this number. They got something like 2 million calls that were free, that registered the citizen's voice about not agreeing with this, you know, or agreeing with the particular perspective. And that swayed the government. Now, would we have ever considered that in the West, in the North? Would we have ever designed such a thing? An economy and an advocacy method developing around a missed call because that's free. And that's quite remarkable to me.
Yeah, that is not.
Yeah, very much so. In this whole reverse engineering side of things, and while Ed was speaking, I was also thinking about the dual SIM card phone, the micro payments, and a lot of that is based on the needs and the necessities. I also have a little bit of a cautionary tale in terms of things that we do need to be aware of, and this utopian technological future is fantastic. But there is pitfalls, and there's things that we need to be aware of and things that we ourselves have the power to change. And I think number one is the whole gender questions. And I see so much threat, on the digital inclusion side, where I'm seeing programs, let's say in Iraq, where phones are being distributed only to males just because it's not cultural. But again, we are taking, I'm seeing a no on one side here, but we'll get onto that one. But it's a lot of issues that we need to become aware of that, as we move forward, gender is a major issue. And I think the other issue as well is protection. Digital protection, if not looked after, will become physical protection issues. And I think that there's not enough awareness on that.
You know what? I think you're totally right about that. I was talking the same conversation actually with GSMA the other day, and we were talking about what's going to happen with the digital divide and the idea that actually access to, we've treated it as an access issue to date, access to tools and access to network, and a little bit around price and around literacy. Actually, I think what we're starting to see is how power systems are reproducing themselves through technology and through access to technology. In South Asia, the number of women who don't have phones compared to the number of men, it's 35% fewer women. It's much higher in South Asia than anywhere else. But it's across the board. Women have less access, and it's a cultural and social phenomenon. It's not a technical one. One of the things I was particularly struck by, again, mind-blowing things, is that Claire, who's the head of M Women, said to me that the piece of research they've just published, one of the top 5 most significant barriers for women having phones is harassment. And I said, what do you mean harassment? And she said, because when women get phones and men find out that women have phones and they get that number, they make harassing calls. They make sexual calls, they make nuisance calls. I'd never heard of that before. And I said, is that actually a thing or is that a fear? And she said, no, it's an actual thing. So there's that stuff going on, which, that's completely cultural and social behavior. That's just using a new tool to reproduce. We're all familiar, anybody who's worked in India, with the problem of Eve calling. It's just reproducing those modalities. And that, I think, is the real challenge that lies ahead, and actually creates a very important space for international organizations, because what you're actually talking about is addressing management of power and addressing inequality, which is something where we certainly, I think, are on firmer intellectual ground than we probably think we are, because we look at it through technology and we think we don't really know about technology. And actually we might not know much about tech, but we know a lot about power and about marginalization. That's something that's come up with you at ITU, Paul.
Well, digital inclusion is a major component of what we work on in ITU, and I don't think, unfortunately, we're going to get there anytime soon. There's a lot of different factors involved in it and why that might be, but I mean, a lot of it is the boring stuff that ITU deals with, infrastructure and investment, for instance. Investment in infrastructure in remote areas, in least developing countries, etc., is not going to happen unless there are public-private partnerships which enable private sector to make profits, which is absolutely fine, but a lot of those models don't exist. So a lot of the gaps that you see are in exactly those areas where there is no incentives to invest, taxation is too high, telecommunications is seen as a revenue generator, etc. So that's a major issue. I mean, in terms of access to the internet, I mean, it's still about 4 billion people who are not online, and even with the massive access to the mobile networks, the quality of access is a huge issue. The quality of service is a huge issue. I mean, most of that is 2G, not the wonderful 4G that we experience. So again, it's quite limiting. But I think the one positive area in terms of infrastructure is there are several maybe, but the whole take-up of mobile broadband, which will allow us to leapfrog generations of technological development in some of these countries, as well as the sort of interesting things that are happening in the small satellite space, where you can now launch a satellite for, $10,000, $20,000 compared to 200 million. So there's a lot of interesting things happening there in terms of getting everybody connected.
Interesting. Anyone else want to come back to that before I throw a last googly question at you? No? Okay. All right. So my last question to you before we throw this, and I'd like to go through the whole panel if we could. Patrick, you referred earlier to the dark side, and there is a tendency, I think, for the technology discussions to become very evangelical. Is that a good word? Very, very, very overtly positive. And as I think came up in Leonard's presentation earlier, for those who were there, technology gets used by the bad guys as well. So I wonder if we could end this little bit anyway by giving me some thoughts off the top of your head on what's happening when the bad guys get hold of technology. How is that influencing how conflict happens? How is that influencing how trafficking happens? Forced migration happens. Abuse happens. What's happening in that space where you think that humanitarians and private sector as well presumably need to step up?
The whole area of cybersecurity, if that's what you're talking about, it's a very vast and very complex and political area. It's obviously a reality. I mean, for all of the wonderful benefits and potential that technology can offer and connectivity can offer, not just the technologies themselves, but the actual fact of communities being more connected and having the tools to develop their own content and tell their own stories and all these wonderful benefits that can happen, there are a whole set of risks. I mean, we're at the ICRC as an organization that understands maybe more than most the importance of confidentiality and the personal data, for instance, and it can literally be a life or death issue if personal data is not properly protected by humanitarian organizations. Everybody knows that. So for me, I mean, there's a new set of challenges because of the technology has enabled maybe an awful lot of diverse and new actors to engage in shady activities. It can be a teenager on their laptop in Germany, or it can be somebody extraordinarily ill-intentioned, cyber criminals or whatever. I think the one factor again, which for me is key in this, and it will be an issue for many humanitarian organizations, and that's the role of the private sector, because private sector are key in whether it's working with ministries of defense in cyber issues of cyber defense. They're key in the whole security aspects, online security aspects for mitigating cyber threats. And they're producing all of the technologies and platforms where all of this is happening. So to have really well-coordinated collaborations and with private sector to address these issues and to anticipate them, I think is essential. I'm not sure all organizations are set up for that. But that is absolutely essential, and there may be compromises needed in the future in the way organizations work, because it would mean sharing sensitive information with private sector partners.
Let's not do this sequentially. Patrick.
Sure. I mean, I think, this whole question of responsible use and acting appropriately is something, again, it's still sensed that, we can mitigate this, I think, as we just mentioned, but, can we eliminate it? And I'm of the belief that we cannot necessarily eliminate the current threats right now, because I think, as a generalization, our planet has been penetrated for a variety of reasons in terms of, what is confidential, what is not. Back in the 60s, it was always about 15 minutes of fame, and that's transformed into 15 minutes of anonymity. Excuse me, English is not my mother tongue. Some words just get me. How do we mitigate some of this? Some of this is about awareness. Some of it is also realizing that what we might not necessarily be producing in terms of data and information might be innocuous, but if we match that with other pieces of information, and as we get to this vast quantities of data, that is something that's very, very easy to occur, and then when we combine these things, the anonymity and the risks start becoming very, very huge. I mean, just as an example, I recently just sent out a feedback survey, which was anonymous. But I sent it out using another application, which is a remailer. By combining these two data sets, I could tell exactly who was sending in this information. I go through agency websites, and I see all sorts of horrific pieces of information that should not be there. I don't necessarily have an answer, and I would put that challenge to all of us in terms of how can we communally start addressing that. A lot of it is about awareness and mitigating some of the risks. And another part is acknowledging that, there are those particular risks and we need to work in these insecure environments. Let me close with just one thing, which you had said, with the bad guys have that technology. And I wish it was just so polarized that there was the good and the bad. And we in our work have to deal with state, non-state, the good guys, the bad guys. The only part that's a little bit concerning is that the technology, the bad guys have better tech than we do these days. And we do need to catch up, and we need to stay savvy on this. And hopefully, I mean, as things go forward, there will be systems looking towards the private sector, to provide that protection. But it's never going to be that safe world that we once lived in.
Sebastian?
So I worked with in the data collection, and for IOM we work a lot with the open data. It's this question about security is to know what people want to get who is the last user of this data. It can be the international organization, it can be the community of IT, and it will depend on who we want to do like a partnership. I know we can collect any kind of data. It's just a matter of maybe, I don't know if it is the role of international organization is to give some rule about this data collection and the data sharing. For example, when we use this small plane, the UAVs, over the camp to do the monitoring, we need to communicate first on what is the work we're going to do with this technology. Then people need to understand what kind of product we're going to give at the end and to who we're going to handle this. Because in the mission in Haiti, it was a data collection with partnership. It can be NGO or governmental institution. And then everything is given to the government. And we had the case like when we fly the UAV over the camp, there was normally the return project that when the camp is closed, normally the displaced people go back to a home. But we find the case that the IDP, the displaced people, go to another camp and then go to another camp and another. When they saw this technology, the UAV, this person thought that this technology is tracking him from camp to camp, and they think that when we take the picture, we have the name, we have the face of the people, we have any kind of information. It's just then we have to explain all the methodology. It's not only about the technology that we do, it's also how we collect the data, because we have a lot of field team, and then to say, okay, this is the data that we collect, and to who we gonna share this data.
That's really interesting. And I was talking to somebody the other day who said that the humanitarian community is only going to pay attention to the data security issue when there is a massive public breach that puts people in danger, and it becomes a reputational risk. So when a whole bunch of IDPs in Yemen get killed because they're a particular ethnicity and someone's stolen that information off an aid agency, which is a scary thought. It'd be nice to think that we get there before that happens. Ed, do you want to wrap up before we throw it to the floor?
Sure. I think one of my colleagues, Kentaro Toyama, has written a very interesting book published just a little over a month ago called Geek Heresy. And he largely debunks the technology as utopia assumption. And one of the points he makes is that he said, technology is neither good or bad. It's an amplifier. It's a neutral amplifier. It amplifies what human behaviors exist underneath it. I don't agree with him 100%, but I do agree that that if there are ill intentions, technology can be an amplifier for those. Just as if there are good intentions, technology can be an amplifier for those. He had two examples that scared me, which, and I think Jonathan Zittrain at Harvard wrote about these, and I heard him relate these stories about in a repressive country crowdsourcing protester photos. In other words, photos of protesters sent to the crowd to identify people who were protesting, match names with photos. That scares me. And the second was crowdsourcing border control webcams. So this actually was in my home country in the US, where they had set up webcams along the southern border between the US and Mexico, and then provided a link for volunteers to watch the webcams and identify when people were crossing the border. So these are two examples that are not using very high technology, but using technology in a way to amplify things that probably those of us in the humanitarian community would not consider. And so it's useful every once in a while to get scared, because when you get scared, you get cautious, and when you get cautious, you take action that hopefully protects people rather than put them at risk.
Thank you. Okay, we've talked enough. Questions, points, reactions? I've got 2 hands up already. Who's got the microphones? We've got Richard down here, and I can't see who that is, but okay, Leonard, go for it.
Yep. Thanks so much. This has been really interesting, and I think I'm particularly taken by your constant references to the power dynamic, because this is a technological discussion, but we cannot be naive in this place. And I think it behooves us really to be advocates and really strong on issues like human rights. When Patrick mentioned that we should all be savvy, I'll respectfully disagree and say we need to be knowing. We need to be knowing, not savvy. How much technology we know, if that's what you meant, is irrelevant. We need to be knowing that, like, for example, in the Haiti case, you had this company that kind of burst forward called Digicel, which dominated the landscape and probably did remarkable work for protection of human rights of women by giving them phones, notwithstanding the concerns, and bringing technology into the hands of poor people where there had been a monopoly blocking them. By the same token, the Gates Foundation had a mobile banking solution, and we love mobile banking in theory, but as it occurred in Haiti, and there was a competition, a $10 million competition to win the mobile banking prize, there were 2 companies, Digicel, voila, Digicel gobbles up, voila, gets all the money, doesn't implement the project properly, and it ends up facilitating the gambling industry, consciously, in partnership, so that those little guys on the corner with their gambling boxes stop stealing 30% of the revenue and give it straight to the gambling entity. So I think we have to be knowing, otherwise you risk reinforcing the power dynamic that led to Haiti falling down in the first place.
Thanks, Leonard. I'll take Richard's point, and then we'll see if anyone wants to react.
Thanks. So I'm going to take your challenge to test our assumptions here a little bit.
Go on then.
So the title for this session is Game-Changing Innovations in Communicating with Communities. You'll note that there's not the technology word there at all. But we've had a very interesting, engaging conversation around technology. And I think that what I'd be really interested to hear from the panel is, what do they think the innovative non-technological innovations are going to be in the coming 10 years?
Good question. Okay, I have some thoughts. Who's got thoughts on that? I've got some thoughts. I think massive innovation for me would be if agencies actually invested properly in systematic face-to-face work, and if all senior leadership in the field undertook to spend at least half a day a week hanging out with the people they're supposed to help, and that time was ring-fenced. I think that would be transformational, and that is, to me, is innovation. There's nothing, you're right, there's nothing about technology and innovation. We were given a tech brief, but really the innovate speaks, I think, to some of the things that sort of been implicit here, which is in what Patrick is saying. We have the technology we need. The innovation is in how we think and how we organize and how we manage our organizations. We can't, it's like in a response where you always blame not having enough money until you get into a response where you have enough money and possibly too much money, and you can't blame the money anymore. So we can't blame the lack of tech anymore. It has to be about us, would be my response to that.
Happy to add to it. I mean, I did try to allude a little bit more, like in terms of innovation of business models. I think it's really important for innovation to become a part of the mindset of humanitarian organizations, and some are doing that, particularly in how they partner and collaborate with local actors. I think that's really, really key. I mean, technology will always come into the equation somehow if you're talking about communicating at scale with a community that might be, 80 million people or something like that. And in there, I think the innovations are clearly, at the moment, from what we can see, crystal balling a little bit into the future, it's still built around mobile combined with broadband in terms of reaching people and engaging people. However, you know, something disruptive can always come along that we don't see now. There was an amazing report called The Missing Link, written in 1984, just before the mobile. And their task was to get, there was only 600 million people at the time had access to a telephone. Their task was to get as many people connected as possible or within reach of a phone. So their ambition was to get everybody within 5 kilometers of a phone box by 2020, I think it was. Don't laugh. At the time, I'm sure a lot of people did think that was extraordinarily ambitious, and it was. But so something disruptive always comes along. But for me, the most important innovation is really of business model of organizations to really think more about what's happening locally, understand more about what's happening locally, work more with local partners, and put in place all of the support structures and partnerships that you need for effective humanitarian response.
And let's not kid ourselves. That's the hard bit. Actually, that's the really hard bit. I mean, I will remember, I'm seeing Nigel at the back of the hall, and I will remember Nigel when he was HC in Haiti, and I cooking up a plan for him to do exactly that, to do visits to camps once a week, because we were stuck in bloody log base, and we never got to talk to anybody. And just every week, we'd set something on, every week something different would happen to derail it. And then cholera happened, and that was one of the things that derailed it. But it was just so interesting and frustrating to see how hard it was just to do something that simple, even when the head of office, theoretically the most powerful humanitarian in the country, wanted to do it too, and still something always came up.
Yeah, just, I mean, trying to remove the whole technology element is very difficult in the sense that there is always technology, going back to cave people days of fire and stones and everything. I think one of the opportunities is not to look at the new technologies, but also trying to explore the hybrid, looking at the old technologies that, when fused with new approaches, can really not only just bring back to life, but create a whole new exploration. I mean, one thing is radio and internet protocol, which is like a fascinating thing. But ultimately, from the innovation side, what I would love to see and what I see happening is a predictable and principled global response that can be customized and localized, and which is undertaken in a very frugal sort of an undertaking. And by frugal, I mean the cost effectiveness, because yes, we can throw massive amounts of money at the problem. We can launch our own satellite constellation. We've got the communications, but we are living, within particular means, and obviously in terms of what are the tolerances on that. But we need to be able to localize something in a predictable fashion, if that makes sense.
We use a lot of technology, but when I arrived in Haiti, it was paper used to collect data. It's just paper, a pen. And then we put in a simple Excel file that everybody can use. It's just one moment, it's we start to meet people, this community in the field, and then I have a great team of GIS people that used to communicate with all the people that we do the assessment, and to community leader, and they start to understand what we do, and they are interested more deeper in the work we are doing, and they want to know about this technology. That the first technology that we use is a simple GPS for data collection, and then we start to use the mobile phone, and then the UAV satellite imagery, and it's a lot. But the more important innovation that we should use, not only in this technology, but is this community approach that we were doing in Haiti with IOM, because we can learn a lot of what happened on the field When we do data collection for risk reduction, we have some ideas, but then it's the community that give us all this direction, saying the problem is coming from here and not from there. Even if we do this analysis with satellite imagery or other data, it's the people that guide us at the end to say that is the problem, and we can solve like this if we start to communicate between this village and the other, and this community and the other. So that's important to involve the local people.
Thanks, Sebastian. Okay, let's take some more questions, because I know we haven't got much time left. Stin and who else? Yes. We've got two more. I'm going to take one more.
If I'll go ahead.
Yeah, go ahead.
Hi, it's Rebecca from Translators Without Borders. And I think we sort of dance around the fact that the humanitarian world is not in control of information and putting together a response anymore. And we really need to look at who is in control of that, and that's the person with the device. And where they get their information is where they want to get it from. I mean, my kids don't get their news from the BBC. They get it from 9gag and Facebook. And that's where we need to understand that they're in control of the information, not us, and what they receive. I'm really interested to know what you think about these sort of global I.org, WikiZero sort of these attempts to put zero-rated information out there to anyone at any time around the world, and whether those are something that that the humanitarian world could get behind and include strong humanitarian messaging through those kinds of zero-rated sources.
Thanks, Rebecca. Stin, you had a question?
Question was actually surprisingly similar, but maybe with a little bit of a different twist. Like, I think how I see and what I actually would want to hear is if we talk about innovation, yes, we tend to think about technology. It is the big shift right now, and I think that's where we're struggling, is that even up till like mass communication, radio, and the things that we've been using for many years, we were in control very much. I mean, or pretty much. With what's happening right now, even with mobile phones and people interacting among each other, we're not so much in control anymore, not as much as we would maybe like to be in control. What I would like to hear is there any innovations that you're aware of where that is actually being sort of addressed, where, and it does relate to what Petra has said, it's like there's a lot of things happening out there that is not related to what we're doing. Also positive things, by the way, because I got mildly depressed at the end of the panel discussion just now. But like, are you aware of anything where like we don't necessarily want to control the information flows, but that we can actually do something with it?
I'm glad you're only mildly depressed. I've got some answers to that. Who else has got thoughts on the panels? Paul, Ed? Paul, go for it.
If I understand correctly, because there's many different types of information flows, but I think one of the holy grails, if you like, for humanitarian response linked to this topic has been access to call data records. And that has been very, very difficult not to crack for lots of very good reasons. It's something at ITU that we're really working on very, very seriously, and we hope we can come up. Again, it's all of the boring stuff, you know. It's the regulatory aspect, it's the data protection aspect to be put in place. But we really hope that we can crack that nut, and we're working on it with many other organizations. Now, that could be really a genuine game changer if that happens, because that means during humanitarian disasters, the aid response community would have access to call data records for population movement, but maybe also indeed for an analysis of the type of messaging that's going on, which will help indicate what the needs are, etc., and where they are. On the other aspect, I'm not sure if I understood correctly, but I think one of the big issues at the moment in terms of connectivity generally is and I have no solution for this, but just recognizing it as a major challenge, is the lack of multilingual content. And there's many parts of the world where people are connected, but there's no interesting content for them to access. One particular country where my wife works, people were complaining that the young men are all the time looking at naked photos of women and worse, right? But digging deep into the issue, there's no content, barely any content in the local language for those guys. So, you know, if there's nothing interesting for me on the internet, what is the incentive for me to be there and to connect and create business and to develop content or whatever? So I think the whole area of content development is a really important one in multilingual, from a multilingual lens. And I know Wikipedia definitely provides a platform for that, and Jimmy Wales is a great advocate for that. But it's a huge problem also for governments, even, you know, who want their populations to be much more engaged. But when they see that, you know, 95% of the content that is being accessed is in English and not in Bahasa or Arabic or whatever, you know, there are genuine and understandable concerns there. So that's something I think governments need to really address as well and stimulate that type of content development.
It's actually a very obvious window for humanitarians as well. I mean, I know Zuckerberg's talked about it as well, mostly to get people to sign up to data packages. But yeah, I mean, it worries me slightly that the private sector is taking over that space when actually there could be a lot more coming into it from our side. To go back to both of you, I think the thing that your point about power and what Leonard said earlier, actually, and Stin, why I think communications technology is so significant is because it's changing the way people organize. And you're totally right about command and control. That's how we operate. What digital technology allows for is many-to-many information. We like the idea, we're sort of stuck in this idea that we need to know everything, and then everything is changing all at once, all the time. So we get very tied up in how do we know everything all the time? Whereas I see a lot of communities understanding sort of completely instinctively, they don't need to know everything. They just need to know what is happening to them and how they can get to who they can help. And then the rest of it, they're not worried about. Many-to-many simultaneous organization of assistance, which can go across international borders, time zones permitting, I think is mind-blowing. And that is the network model that has disrupted so many other industries. And I think industry is the right word. And I think it's coming to, you know, we're seeing it. That's one of the things that communities, when you're talking about the capacity of you know, younger countries just leapfrogging years of technological development, they're also leapfrogging years of thinking. You know, they're not encumbered by the fact that they knew what a landline was. When they're not having to shift to mobile. Mobile is what they know. They don't have to shift from ATM cards to a keyboard because a keyboard's all they've ever had. So the mentality shift seems to me that's something we haven't got a handle on at all. And what it does represent fundamentally is a power shift, because it's not a system that can be controlled. That's not the point. That's not what it's about. I don't think we've even begun to understand that. And I think, incidentally, we have that in common with other industries, that other industries are still only beginning to understand what a many-to-many simultaneous information exchange and network model actually means, for good or for bad. And I think, you know, we have to learn, and we have to learn from other industries that are learning the hard way as well. I'm not sure there is a way to learn other than the hard way, actually.
I mean, if I could build on that a little bit, which I think this is a really important point. Just two quotes I heard within the last few years, I think, that are relevant. One was from Clay Christensen, the Harvard professor who's the father of disruptive innovation. His book, The Innovator's Dilemma, has probably become a classic text in most business schools. And I asked Christensen at a roundtable, I said, do you know of any organization that's been able to embrace disruptive innovation in their headquarters? And he thought for a minute, and he said, no, none, right? So the second wake-up call is the CEO of Duolingo. Duolingo is an online system for learning languages that's available free. There are more people in the US registered for Duolingo language classes than there are registered in schools for language classes. I mean, that's how large this has become. And someone asked him the question at the WGET meeting, and Patrick may remember this. They asked him, you know, is it hard to work with humanitarian organizations, you know, like the UN or like us at the Red Cross Red Crescent? And he said, let me put it this way. He said, as a startup organization, we had maybe 3 months of cash. And we were worried about would we go out of business in 3 months. But for humanitarian organizations and government organizations, 9 months is really fast. And that's the fundamental disconnect. So the wake-up call for us is, can we ever be agile enough or fast enough to play in this world of disruptive innovation? And can we be willing to let go of the central control and look for it to happen in the periphery of our organizations so that we can take advantage of it? That's a huge wake-up call. That's a huge culture shift for us as humanitarian organizations, and culture shifts are the hardest things to have happen. So I worry about what is finally going to get us off that mark.
Just one note, and again, building a lot of this, and just getting back to, you know, Rebecca's question in terms of, you know, this loss of control. And I would really, I think the transformation has been from the illusion of control to the awareness of the lack of control, because we've never had it. Well, quite frankly, I mean, what we had was instrumentation, which was very fine-tuned and gave us a perspective, our perspective on what the situation was at hand. With hyperconnectivity, with the many-to-many, all that veil drops, because anything that, you know, we can produce is challenged, and rightly challenged, and we embrace that, because it does open, you know, up that dialogue of communications. In terms of our role, I think the question is, you know, how do we deal with all this information, multiple data sources, validity, responsible use, et cetera, is that if we want to control this, we don't control the content, but we try to define what are the standards. How do we enforce a rigorousness in terms of the principled use of data and information and network? And also, I think we can serve as a quality assurance mechanism, that we work as an association collectively in terms of this, you know, this is the guidelines on how to do this responsibly. And I'm not saying that it's this particular group here, because it's the coalition of the willing. It's all the many-to-manys that are out there that are not necessarily doing things in a malicious way, but it's a general lack of awareness on what the standards of the principled use are going to be. And I think that's our role moving forward.
You know, you just triggered something, Patrick, that someone else said to me, I think is really important, is that when it comes to control, I think one of the ways we're actually most controlling is when it comes to accountability and monitoring and evaluation. And I think that's one area where our control is already being challenged and is going to be really fundamentally challenged. We sort of present accountability as if it's us opening up. And actually, we work so hard to define what accountability is, what we think it is. We make it a very, very narrow thing. And I'm thinking of, I'm trying to remember his name, the politician in Jakarta who was snapped driving in a bus lane, which is a no-no in Jakarta, because it's reserved. Snap that went on Twitter. It went to 50,000 people, got retweeted, and by Monday morning he had to turn himself into the local police station. I think that's what accountability is going to start to look like. We still think it's about a hotline. And that, I think, is where actually we think we're controlling, and actually we're going to find out really quickly we're absolutely not in control of what it means to be transparent, accountable, or to produce quality work. I'm getting wind-up signs. Do we have to stop there, or do we have time for one more round of questions?
Within the next 5 minutes.
All right. Anybody got any quick questions before I wrap up? Okay, 2 more. Let's take those 2, because they're both from ladies. We haven't had enough ladies.
Hi, I'm Len from the Philippines, from the Peace and Conflict Journalism Network. And I wanted to share 2 experiences we had about technology. And we've always thought of technology as related to access, and how affected populations can actually access technology for free. And in the Philippines, there are some programmers who have developed a program into internet where you can text this number even if you don't have any credit on your phone. And it's actually working, because we've tried it. And another one is that, because we're always concerned, we're working with journalists, and journalists are covering conflict areas. So we've developed a keen interest on internet security. And there's a certain app in the internet I forgot the name, sorry. When you download it in your phone, you can get free internet. So it's an app that gives you a tunnel, a VPN, where you can be secured. Nobody knows where you are. It's a connection you go to the internet, and then you're secured in this tunnel. But when you're there, somehow this program had bypassed the telcos in the Philippines for almost 5-7 months, I think, that users of this app can access free internet. Well, I'm just curious if you have had similar experiences in the countries you work with or in the organizations you work with, and what you think about these platforms for affected communities. Thank you.
Thank you.
I don't know whether you wanted to respond to that one first, or should I?
Go for it.
Okay. It's Meg Sattler here from the Telecoms Cluster. Just one thing that I've sort of noticed in emergencies with regard to innovation is that you always see these two kinds of innovation. And I think one thing that we haven't really mentioned yet is the innovation that comes from communities themselves. I mean, anyone who worked in Zaatari camp, I've never seen so much innovation in my life. People who are in a situation where they don't have much able to access electricity because they've worked out how to hook up to the one tower that they found, or being able to access the one spot on the periphery of the camp where they realise they can get Syrian phone reception. So there's sort of that happens everywhere. And then the other side of innovation is this kind of international aid agency innovation sector, where you have these huge aid agencies with innovations departments and also the private sector who have all these ideas. And as soon as there's an emergency, they say this is where we can test it, which is why you see something like Nepal, where there are all these issues with deployment of drones and things like that weren't really coordinated. So particularly as we look at our new strategy for how we can work with technology to serve affected populations, I'm wondering whether there's any advice or examples from the panel of how we can better merge the two.
Ollie, wow. We have 2 minutes left. All right, I'll have a go, because I think, I mean, honestly, the Philippines blew me away, and I know everyone says the Philippines is easy, but you know, everybody in the Philippines runs rings around every single aid agency I've ever seen in how to use technology. I've seen a similar in Indonesia. I'm looking at a project at the moment called Peta Jakarta, which is not a citizen-driven, but it's a crowdsourced real-time mapping of flooding that's available to government and to citizens. It's designed so the interface works for both. And it's designed to help those two groups understand each other's world, not just share data. And I think when we talk a lot about communication we lose track of what communication is actually about, which is about relationships and is about relationship building. And that goes back a little bit to your point about how do you bring those together. I think we have to understand one of the power shifts and mentality shifts that is essential. We have to understand that the experts, by definition, in most of this stuff, are the people we consider beneficiaries. And that is another reason to add to the 1,000 why we need to lose that word. Because these people are the experts, and they are the only experts. You are never going to be able to bring somebody in from Washington to design an app for Zaatari. It just doesn't work like that. And that's the culture, goes back to the cultural, social context of use of technology. I remember watching a Haitian colleague, to speak to your example. I was sitting in a cafe in Haiti when it was pouring with rain, and I was with a Haitian friend, and he was looking at his BlackBerry, and it rained for about half an hour, and in Haiti that meant you were usually into flooding somewhere. And I was sitting there thinking, well, you know, golly, this is going to be bad, and thinking, you know, if I'm lucky, you know, by the time I get home in a few hours, IOM might have something out, and by the end of the day, they'll have a decent sitrep. And, you know, I said to Gerald, wow, this is not looking good. And he looked at his BlackBerry and he said, yeah, there's flooding in Cité du Soleil, and it's really windy up in Corrales. And he just gave me this whole real-time readout from his BlackBerry Messenger feed, which is what everyone used in Haiti who had BlackBerries because it was free. He was a local journalist. He was 23. And he could have, you know, he was doing real-time information analysis just as a matter of course. That was the way he ran his life. That was the way he navigated his city, because that's what you do to survive in Port-au-Prince. It's a dangerous city. He'd reroute us as we were driving through the town because he'd see there'd been a shooting somewhere and we ought to take a different road. So that's what I've seen, and that was where my kind of amazement at what communities can do, for good or for bad, came from, and how they're just, the quantum leap is there. But I think that thing about recognizing that the experts now are the communities is where we have to start. And yeah, all right, Rich is mouthing at me saying they've already been in the communities. Just to finish on the Philippines, actually, one of the things that impressed me most when I was working in BOPA response was the fact that most local organizations had whiteboards outside their offices and wrote down all the donations they'd received on their whiteboards. And that seems to me a very easy thing to do and not something you need a widget for. That's a mentality, and that's also something we need to learn. Over to my other panelists to wrap up.
To wrap up, but just to quickly address the lady at the back. I don't want to guess whether you're from New Zealand or Australia because I always get it wrong, but definitely one of those countries. But it just dawned on me when you were saying that. I mean, you know, innovation is probably a word that means many things to many different people. I mean, essentially it's about doing things differently, but as you were explaining what was going on from the camp that you described, I mean, it was clear to me there's a direct link really between innovation and resilience, and that's something that, I mean, essentially that's this overlapping area of innovation and resilience is where I think humanitarian organizations might find their comfort zone most easily in dealing with it. But for sure, humanitarian organizations need to find a way to tap into that resilience and innovation in communities that they're working with, and I would agree with everything that Imogen said in that sense. But quickly wrap up, because I hope the wine is not going warm in the sunshine upstairs. But essentially, I mean, for me, it's definitely not about the technology. It's about the people. But I do think that there's an enormous amount of benefits that's coming from connectivity, and particularly for mobile and broadband. They're transformative technologies, they're empowering technologies, but if they remain the preserve of the privileged and the few, then we will have missed glaring opportunities as humanitarian organizations to really tap into the potential of truly empowering people to deal with all of the challenges that come in the humanitarian environment. So I think in order to do that, we really need to innovate our own business models to ensure that this opportunity is not missed. I think we should all have digital inclusion at the center of our work, and understand that itself is a path to potential sustainable development, which is what we really need at the global level.
Thanks, Paul. Ed, you're looking pensive. All right, Ed's pensing. Patrick? Sebastian?
He's worried because the New York Stock Exchange just shut down, maybe a cyber attack.
It's really,
what?
Sorry. It's really hard to build on what Paul was saying. I think that basically captured it. But just going back to innovation 1 second, because to me, innovation is about failure. It's failure of a business process, and to me, form follows failure. The one challenge I see always, and as we always discuss, we're always told, do not improvise, do not innovate in situ, but we know it fails in headquarters. We all are aware that, the innovations do happen in the field when they're happening. I think the question we need to ask ourselves is, how do we do that responsibly? And number two, how do we take what is mostly a lot of improvisation and make it into innovation, vis-a-vis scaling it and being able to duplicate it somewhere else and learning from that? And I think that's the challenge we've got to put forward, regardless whether it happens in headquarters or in the field where we're not supposed to be doing it. But how do we scale it? Sorry.
We need to work closely with national institutions, government. For example, for the UAV, we didn't go like this, fly, take imagery, and then just use it for us. We went to the civil aviation to see the regulation. There was not regulation for the UAV. So we work with them to write some scenarios, some case study to say, okay, this is how we're going to use the technology. Maybe when I was following also for the Nepal, there was a lack of authorization for the NGO or other organization using the UAV. So this is I think a recommendation I can say is to just work closely and to see what are all the regulation in the country. And then one challenge is also to include, for me, all the time, the community for this technology, like the GIS or the UAV. It's to work with the local, with this community. For example, we hire in IOM the OpenStreetMap community volunteer, and then we train them, and then after, as they still volunteer for OpenStreetMap, they start to train the other volunteer without the IOM name. It's this domino I was saying that we have to work with the national institution, with the community, and then also they give us a lot of information saying, okay, we have, for the UAV technology, it was new, so we didn't know at the beginning how to use it, and what, in which case, and we have some idea, but then they start to implement more ideas, and they give us all this context in the country, what was happening in terms of politics, in terms of environment, of disaster. So that is a challenge, to listen to the people and try to follow also their recommendation, not only our recommendations.
Thank you, Sebastian. Ed, you're out of time.
Right. So we can circle back, I think, to the question on, you know, on innovation, which is where we began, I think. So two things that in my experience are keys to innovation, and one is, and both of them are difficult for humanitarian organizations. The first is the Zen principle of beginner's mind. And beginner's mind means that even if you're the subject matter expert, you're going to approach something as if you don't know. That's hard to do in knowledge organizations such as ours. So beginner's mind is the first. The second is the experimentation. So Jim Collins has this wonderful principle of saying that, you know, when organizations are most stressed or most challenged, they need to vary like mad. And varying means you have a portfolio of many experiments, many of which will fail, but some of which will succeed. But that's hard for humanitarian organizations to do, is to try 12 things where 10 are going to fail and 2 are going to succeed. So that openness to experimentation and failure and that beginner's mind are probably 2 of the most important things that we need to cultivate, and probably 2 of the hardest things for humanitarian organizations to do.
Thank you. Okay, I'm aware that I'm between you and wine, and that I actually have no idea how to sum that up. There's so much kind of that missed call thing is amazing, and there's so much stuff that I don't know. I hope you're all going away in the same state I am. That something you've heard something today that's made you think, "What, really? Wow, that I need to change how I think." I often end presentations with a picture of the Starship Enterprise, because I don't think anybody knows where all this is going, least of all us. It's a hell of a ride. It's the ride of, I think, our century. I think it's brilliant to have these amazing people here. So I want to say thank you to them. They're all going to be 2 glasses of wine down in half an hour. So if you want to challenge them, that's probably a good time to do it. But let's continue this conversation now and over the next coming days. And thank you so much for being here and giving such good questions. But thank you to you guys for bringing such thought and interest and passion to what you said today. It was a brilliant panel. I really enjoyed it. Thank you. Upstairs is the wine. You don't need more than that, I think.